Welcome to the latest episode of High Stakes. I'm Paige Soya, Managing Director of K Street Capital, and today's episode is going to be about emerging technologies in the audience engagement space. And we have two important guests, actually, one who's one of our investors and LPs, Sara Fagen, and one who is the CEO founder of one of our portfolio companies in the space, Michael Barnett. So before we get started, why don't we start with some intros? Sara, I'll have you go first.
Yeah, Sara Fagen. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of Tunnl. We are an Arlington, Virginia-based audience intelligence platform. So we help connect advertisers with the people they're trying to reach. We have a suite of tools that allow them to better find those individuals they're trying to target. I'm a proud investor in K Street. I've been an angel investor for quite a while, and it's been really fun to watch the DC market really flourish in the last maybe decade or so with so much technology. And frankly, we'll talk a little bit probably about government today, but a lot of it nothing to do with government, which, I think many years ago was everything was very government.
Very different. Yeah,
So, yeah.
definitely. Thanks, Sara. Michael.
Yeah. I'll give you a little of my backstory just because it ties into ultimately the companies that I've built. But so I had a chance to work in Parliament, ended up writing a thesis on what ended up becoming Brexit. And then I figured out in the political experience and the nonprofit experience, I figured out a way to get people to donate and volunteer that was really efficient. So normally you were spending over $1 to acquire a donor dollar the first year. And we figured out to cut that by 50, 60%. And so I got to go all over the world consulting for nonprofits, speaking at their events, and realized that when you brought the right people together in a room, could be 10,000 people, could be 100 people, you unlocked a lot of really great ideas, moved causes forward, moved companies forward, moved industries forward. And so first company, did something in the political space on engaging audiences, sort of pulling on this thread. And that one ended up exiting recently. And then started a media company during COVID. Didn't go well. It was in virtual events. And if you looked at Hopin, you understand. And then InGo, we sort of restarted during COVID, focusing on enterprise referrals more broadly, and especially around experiences. And how do you get people that are going to these great experiences? Could be a webinar, could be an event, could be a award program, to refer out more of their connections, because every company can basically grow endlessly on the connections of their existing audience.
Thanks, Michael. Actually, and Sara, maybe you can share a little bit more about Tunnl and the inspiration behind it, because I do think it's relevant here as well.
Yeah. So about a decade ago, the company's origins formed in a different company, but essentially it was around trying to make linear TV media buying more efficient, because TV is often the largest line item in certainly any brand or large trade association or political campaign, but it was the least data driven. And so we really set out to try to solve that problem and to help our customers figure out how to better allocate linear spend. Over time, as the world has moved to connected television and the fragmentation of media just generally, and the advancement of social media, video platforms, we've looked at a much more holistic approach to, first and foremost, focusing on the audience and building high quality audiences that meet people's needs and our trade association brands needs in particular, but that then we could figure out how to help them find those individuals no matter where they're viewing a video or no matter where they're located. So we have software that helps determine if this is a good person to find on linear television, or you should definitely focus on connected TV, or actually maybe there's about, in our audiences, we find basically anywhere between 12 and 20% of any given audience is really just not reachable on the big screen in their home. And so you've got to then look at something else. And I think given Michael's background, that's where event management or, out of home advertising, can be an interesting connection point. And I think as the world and the technology advances, brands will have a lot more opportunity to do just much more robust and surgical communicating and reaching the people they're trying to reach.
Yeah.
Really interesting. We're seeing a lot of demand on the experience side for better insight into ROI, better insight into who's showing up, the value of those people, and just a lot more insight into accuracy, precision. It sounds like a similar trend. And these corporations are spending a fortune on field marketing, their webinars, their third party events, their trade shows, and everything else. And the insight, it's pretty opaque what's actually happening on the other side of that.
And the other thing we really focus on here, we're in Washington, is that government is ever present and growing in terms of the rules and regulations, and the sort of even at the city level are causing any brand that is regulated, which now is most brands are basically in a regulated industry of some sort, that they end up having to sort of navigate a lot more than they did even 5 years ago, which is to say they've got government regulations at all levels of government. They've got activist shareholders in some cases. They've got, activist employees. They sometimes have consumer bases that don't agree with their employee base. And they're having to navigate so many more topics that I would call them sort of small p political topics as they think about how to put their brand out into the market. And that's really the intersection at which we come in, which is we build audiences, we can build any audience, but we tend to focus in the area where we have incredible strength by background, which is to sort of help regulated brands think through kind of all the dynamics of what they're balancing and build an audience that meets those needs.
Yeah, and I guess Michael, when we're talking about capturing attention, like I think it's so interesting what your product does because, well, I guess maybe you could talk a little bit about how it captures audience attention and how it prioritizes that attention towards whatever the event or experience was where that person was.
Yeah, I think if you think about digital now and just the absolute flood that is digital, we're all awash in trillions of Twitter posts, thread posts, Instagram posts, emails, and AI is only going to 100x that. Right? Like the amount of content one person can produce in a week is now at least 2, 3, 4 times what it was, and that's only going to go up. And so digital is just getting more and more saturated. So then it becomes a question of, well, how do you reach people? How do you great, I've got this audience and I've got these targets based on Sarah's data, based on other data sets that I might have. And I've got these people I've identified and I know what they care about, but how do I even reach them? How do I engage them in a meaningful way? And what we found is that almost any brand, right? Like once upon a time, you would just send people to your website. And then once upon a time, you would send people to like a landing page. And now it's like, well, we'll send you to an offer, like a free coffee or something else. And what you're having to do is create more and more valuable engagement for the target, right? For the prospect. And that's where experiences come in, right? An experience is almost always a high value offering to somebody for 2 reasons. One is it should be something fun, VIP reception, great conference, thought leader, dinner with other industry experts. And then the other part is like, but so how do you get to those people? How do you get them into that experience? And what we've seen work incredibly well and what InGo is built on is driving referrals. If I say, hey, Sarah, hey, Paige, you should come check out this new Lockheed Martin engine or this new Google AI functionality, that's interesting. But if I instead say, hey, there's this really great dinner we're going to, this really great reception or this really great conference on this topic about this thing, you go, oh, that's much more interesting. Right now I can actually engage and you get 2 value props, right? The experience and the social connections. And so InGo's built a bunch of technology to leverage that, to make it really easy for people to say, I'm going to invite Sarah, I'm going to invite Paige, I'm going to invite my network to join me for this wonderful experience, be it a webinar, an award program, anything where there's a sort of a celebratory moment and like where you want to advocate, right? The causes are great. And to Sarah's point, right? Causes create value for people, planting trees, saving whales, building schools. There's all these different causal motivations as well for people. And I think that's where people need to start thinking more deeply about their audience is what do they really care about? What will motivate them? And not just like, oh, great, here's another landing page to throw out into the ether and hope people click on.
Yeah, I especially like it because I mean I've used the product myself many times and gone to many events and been able to often you can't leverage the value of the event you went to online. Like how do you do that? Right? It's not like an easy thing to do, I think, unless you have your own newsletter and you put stuff in there about it or whatever. But InGo makes it super easy to share it with your own network, which I think it has its own network effects, right? It's like a social proof mechanism where if if your friends see that you're doing something, they're at least going to look into doing it. Maybe they might not do it, but at least they're going to consider it. So I just think that's super interesting. But maybe you guys can take a step back and talk about the space in general, like the people that you sell to, who are the buyers of these kind of products. What's the total landscape of the technologies that they're looking at? Not just your companies, but other companies in the space that are doing different things, but how that fits into the picture.
Well, I would say, Michael touched on ROI. I think that's always top of mind. And it's one of the questions that people are constantly asking in the advertising space, which is like, what did I get out of this? I know I put this money in and I deployed it on whatever mechanism. Uh, and they want to know that they've gotten some value out of it, or that they grew their share, or they grew their image. And so I think that companies that are able to make the connection between, execution and return, are having the most success. Right now, obviously, AI is the rage as well. And AI means a lot of different things. We always joke in our
Yes, it
company.
does.
Yes. That we were AI before anybody even knew what AI was, because our audiences are all built on machine learning algorithms. But yeah, I think they're also looking for cutting edge. And so, there's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle, from audience measurement to attribution to, the sort of the ad tech features of just deploying advertisements, to kind of more marketing insights. And there are a lot of players along the way. The MarTech space specifically, there's thousands and thousands and thousands. And when you look at those Lumascapes, you can't even, like, you need a magnifying glass, and so what we really try to focus on as a company, and I think this is where the market will start to move, is, and you'll see a lot of consolidation. There's already been a lot of consolidation, is like getting up to the funnel and getting it to the top of the funnel, and be more in the decision intelligence space, which is like, how do I put all these pieces together to help a brand make a decision quicker? And so I could rattle off thousands of companies I've come across that are all doing kind of some piece of something, some better than others. But I do think it's a crowded space. And so you really have to differentiate.
I would
Yeah.
say, like, when I think about a landscape, I try to like reduce it down to the essential element, which is like, what's the problem that landscape is solving? And when we talk to our customers, it's cost per acquisition, which is brutal. It's gone up every year, and you're starting to see lots of people are talking about partnerships, lots of people are talking about referrals, lots of people are talking about super targeting, hyper targeting, AI targeting, because the money you're going to throw at go to market and audience acquisition has got to be laser targeted to make sure you're getting the right people. Because once upon a time, you could just go throw lots of Google ads out there. I mean, we're talking about like early 2000s. You just, like, it was so cheap. You could
Yep.
just acquire tons of people and then filter it out as you went down. Now, I think, to Sarah's point, you got to do the filtering before you even start spending money.
Yes.
And so I think that's really interesting, right? I think that's where you start to get really good insights into um, ideal customer profile, right? Like, who do I want? Well, I probably want somebody that, is cutting edge. Well, what does that mean that they're on the cutting edge? Like, how do you know that somebody's on the cutting edge, right? Like, I don't want the laggard. If I target them, my company is certainly not ready for your typical laggard. And so I think, like, that's where this gets interesting. And I think that's where, like, referrals are really interesting, because birds of a feather flock together. That it just so happens that you sort of, what we've seen, lots of our customers go, well, how do I target ads out of Google or out of InGo? And you go, well, because your audience knows your prospects, they naturally do the targeting for you. And so I think that's interesting. I think the other thing that's interesting, and I'd love to hear Sarah's thoughts on this as well, is the community element. Like, I think that, what you're thinking really hard about over at Tunnl is, who's my current community and how do I get more of that? And how do I empower that community, engage that community, understand that community? And I think we're thinking a lot of the same way, which is, great. You have a community. Are they empowered to grow the community themselves? Do you understand who they are? Do you understand who your VIPs are? Who has the most influence? Who can drive the growth? Let alone, are you doing that? Are you driving that growth? And so we think there's a lot of opportunity there, because you can start to, one, be very targeted, but you can also start to collapse the go-to-market funnel. We spent, I don't know, the better part of a couple decades now expanding and slicing up the funnel into more and more pieces. And to some degree, it's just overly complex now, right? You need to get more targeted on fewer people and then with more powerful but fewer steps. You can't have a 100-step funnel and think it's going to work and be manageable for a team.
Yeah. Were you going to add anything there, Sarah?
No, I think that's right. And I think that's, where companies like ours and others in the space that do audience targeting or, a referral and event management, kind of come into play, which is to help people get to a better starting point, which is to start out with the right group of people to be communicating with. And ultimately that will increase ROI, because you'll have
Right.
fewer wasted impressions, fewer wasted emails, fewer wasted, coupons given away that don't actually translate into anything long term. So,
Yeah, exactly. And actually on that note, like thinking about the costs and all of this and trying to target the right fewer people, but for longer also, like a meaningful and sustained engagement with those potential customers or that audience. Are you guys seeing what technologies are you seeing in the space to help with the process of staying engaged with sustained engagement for longer periods of time with the right audience versus just attracting that audience in the first place and pulling them in?
Sure. So I think that what we're seeing that's really exciting is repurposing content and doing it very effectively. I think AI can be a real leverage point here, which is great. We just had a webinar and somebody spoke. Now it turns into an article, turns into a blog post, turns into a social media post. We distill it down to a hot take reel. We reuse that. Um, and so I'm not very political. I haven't actually watched a lot of Joe Rogan. I've seen, but I like on YouTube every once in a while, you're scrolling through and you see one of his things and you're like, that's actually really like the hot take's really powerful, right? That was interesting, right? And like, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to do that in B2B. I think that oftentimes I'm like, oh, I've got this interesting question about a particular customer, like and what their CEO said, or a particular challenge I'm running into in management. It would be really fantastic if instead of having to go listen to an hour-long talk or a 2-hour-long talk, the AI would be like, here's the, I don't know, 45 seconds you need to hear about IBM or about Google to know how to solve their problem.
yeah. And what I see, Paige, is, I think some of the most innovative things happening in the marketing space is really around creative and, and the ability to, and I think AI has the potential to be incredibly powerful here, which is there's so many advertisements, snippets, social media posts, what have you, just flooding consumers on a hourly, daily basis. And it's really, we always say we can find you the right people, but the creative that's a whole other animal that needs to be solved for. And that's where getting to sustained attention really matters, is that you've got to do both things really, really well. You've got to make sure your dollars are spent wisely. And when you capture the right people, you've got to figure out the ability to keep them coming back or get them into a funnel so that you can get them to join your community or your brand page or whatever your objective is. And so I've seen a number of different kind of smaller startups that I think have a lot of promise. And there's other bigger players too, but I think you're going to just see a ton of dollars flowing there, and ultimately, there'll probably be a couple big winners down the road. It's hard to kind of pick today like, who I think that's going to be, but I've been watching that space a little bit as well, and I think we've certainly seen some interesting companies come through K Street.
Yep,
Yeah.
definitely. Well, we're coming up on time, so I guess I would just say any final thoughts for our founders or investors that are listening to this episode?
I think it's a great time to start a business. There's so much energy in the technology space. There's so many, I think, good opportunities. Obviously, building a business is not for the faint of heart. It's hard and bumpy, and it can be a roller coaster at times. But um, I think particularly in this area, as I've gotten more deeper into the business community, and I was in politics for many years before that. So I came to the business community relatively late in my career, so to speak. I've been really heartened just like at the diversity, the amount of great funds around here,
Yeah.
and Yeah. And so I think that this is a great place to do business and a great place to do technology.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's just when I think about my own startup, which was over a decade ago that I started. There's just so many technologies now that make it easier to
Yeah.
start from zero to get to where it took me 3 or 4 years to get to. You could get to in 6 months now, so it's really pretty incredible. Anything else, Michael?
Yeah, I think when you're thinking about growing a company, growing an organization, a nonprofit, or anything, right? Like I think what Sarah's doing, I think the way to understand everything we just talked about, if you're from outside our space, is to think, well, first thing, I need a customer base, I need an audience, and so I need to understand them. I need data, right? I need Tunnl, something like that, to understand this audience. And then, right, you got to start creating value for that audience. Oftentimes, that's going to be content. That's going to be something, like something more, and a product, hopefully, maybe a freemium offering. And those start to create experiences. And then once you've got these experiences, you want to start getting them referred out. And that's where InGo comes in. And so I think that's where InGo's really exciting and interesting is we leverage the behavioral science, the AI, the data, and the ego to really drive people to do as much referring as we can get them.
Couldn't have said it better. That was the perfect tie-in to wrap this all up. So thank you.